Today we're going to look at Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. So first of all, just a little bit on the background of the book. I'm not going to go into this a ton. It was written between 1965 and 1968 after Solzhenitsyn was exiled from the Gulag for the most part. It was his second book, Solzhenitsyn's first book, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. It was published in '62. He became quite famous for that. And the book itself, the Ivan Denisovich book, is part of the thaw under Khrushchev. He allowed it to be published, and then other people started publishing a lot of stuff, and then the Soviet leadership was going, we got a lot of stuff going on here, let's clamp it down. And so they started clamping down on it. And Solzhenitsyn was in exile when that clamping down was going. He was in Estonia, living with some former inmates with him. They're called Zeks, Z-E-K-S. It's a tricky word. If I say sex, it's Zeks. All right, so anyways, he finished it in Estonia and smuggled out the book into the West, but was not going to publish it because it had so many names of people who are currently living in the Gulag. The lady with whom he was living was then captured by the KGB, interrogated, tortured. She gave up the last copy, so the authorities had the book now with the names, and that's when Solzhenitsyn rubbed his nose, and the microform was published in Paris, and the book went viral. Billions of copies were sold almost immediately upon its release in the early 70s. He talks about that actually on the dust jacket to the book, which I don't think you guys have, but it's called the Gulag Archipelago, an experiment in literary investigation. For years, I have with reluctant heart withheld from publication this already completed book. My obligation to those still living outweighed my obligation to the dead. But now that state security has seized the book anyway, I have no alternative but to publish it immediately. And that's what he did. He was exiled upon publishing the book. He lived the next 30 years or so, 20 years in Vermont. And then when the Soviet Union fell, he came back. Now, when the book first came out, everyone loved Solzhenitsyn. He was a critic of Soviet communism. But then they found out he was a moralist. And his star started to fall. He gave a famous speech in 1977 at Harvard called The World Split Apart. And the theme of that is that the Soviets and the Western democracies are both decadent. The Western democracies are less bad than the Soviets, but all of them have forgotten God, forgotten morality, embraced materialism, lost their soul. And from that point on, he was not invited to the White House. He was famously shunned by Gerald Ford in the White House. Jimmy Carter never invited him. I think it was Reagan did have him there, but Reagan was kind of famously opposed to communism and willing to make allies, even with moralists, to fight it. So the flavor of this is that Solzhenitsyn does not criticize the Gulag simply because it compromises freedom. In addition, it's spiritually impoverished and a moral monstrosity. He never does anything simply in the name of freedom in the book. It's always freedom for duty, obligation, tradition, morality, doing what's right. And that move always bothered Western liberals. It's a little known fact that the Seinfeld character, the soup Nazi, is based on Solzhenitsyn. So, there we go. What is the Gulag Archipelago? Well, once again, Solzhenitsyn tells us on the dust jacket, it's an experiment in literary investigation. His daughter, wife, when she wrote a preface to the book after Solzhenitsyn himself had died, said that it's an epic poem, part autobiographical, geography, part history, part philosophy. And that seems about right to me. It has a lot of different forms. He sometimes is very sarcastic. He'll use italics. He'll do a lot of crazy things when he writes. So it's a lot of different forms put into the same book. The book has 7 parts. Okay? Now, 2 things about this long book. Can we agree? I mean, this is an enormous book. And when he's done, he said, I could go on. It's like, well, spare us. And so it's a long book, and he knows it's a long book. But it tells a story. Think about what we had today, the first book in the book, or the first chapter in the first book, called The Arrest. Book 6 ends with exile. And if you follow, we didn't read all of book 1, but you see it's arrest, interrogation, first cell, first love. He gets sentenced. It's spring, he gets sentenced. He's ready to get transported, and a train arrives. They go to book 2, perpetual motion, about the trains and the building of the tracks. And then part 3, in the camp. Right? You live out your sentences, and you grow, part 4, you rally, part 5, you're freed and you live in exile, part 6, but the camps aren't like what they used to be. Last one, Stalin is no more. How the gulags are different from they were at the beginning. And it's a little bit like a medieval bishop in 1500 at the end of the book is running the gulags. It's kind of like someone who goes through the forms of believing, but the spirit is gone. Whereas Stalin, he was a believer, right? And we have the cords of bodies to prove it. So there's an arc. It's like you're drawn in, you see it go. And there's another arc, I'll call it a moral arc of the book. The first part, I would say the first part, second part, in the beginning of the third part, is about the tyranny that is the gulag. Okay, the tyranny that is the gulag. And maybe even all of part 3 is about that. First of all, the conditions on the ground and then the effect that it has on people in part 3. And then the ascent begins with the chapter, The Soul in the Barbed Wire. The Soul in the Barbed Wire, the first chapter is called The Ascent. And then there's another high point in the book where the Zeks mutiny. Those are the 2 high points. So it's despair, hope. And after the mutiny, the gulag isn't what it used to be, the last parts. So there is an arc, but once again, I'm not going to defend the idea that each part has to be in this book. There are some parts that have to be in it for its essence to be conveyed, but some parts could be snipped and without losing overmuch from the book. Okay, so we in good shape. That's the overall arc. Now, what's my selection criteria for the excerpts? I think it's just something we should be self-conscious about. I'll do my best to give you an idea. I picked out the parts not about history. Those are all very interesting. And I did not emphasize the conditions of life in the gulag. Okay, so when this came out, the real vim and vigor behind the book was that he showed that communism was always bad. From the beginning, it was bad. It wasn't like this great idea in the hands of that virtuous Lenin, and then Stalin blew it all up. Right? That's kind of the Animal Farm story. Right? He just says, no. It was never good. And the essence of many of the chapters are about that. Those are of extraordinarily important historical value, but they aren't essential to understanding his moral teaching and his critique of the Gulag. So I am not assigning that stuff. If you look at the first 4 chapters, I mean, this kind of gives you a flavor of how to choose, all right? So arrest, history of our sewage system, interrogation, Bluecaps. This is a little bit like the book, right? Autobiography, 80 pages of history, showing that from the beginning the Bolsheviks were putting people in concentration camps. They invented the term. And then the Germans borrowed from it and perfected it. Right? And that's the history of our sewage system. And then he's interrogated, autobiography. And then political teaching, the Bluecaps. Right? And so the whole first part of the book intertwines his autobiography and the history of the law of the archipelago and such. Okay, and my selection criteria is to go to the political teaching and to use the other stuff to illustrate it. So I'm going to cut to the chase and go to the political teaching. Okay, we're in good shape. So I had never read this book. In 2013, I was at BYU at a conference. A friend of mine said, "Why haven't you read the Gulag Archipelago?" And I said, well, I don't need to read any more about Stalin. I spent my whole childhood reading about Stalin. I had books about the Soviet Union all over the place. I could go through the orders in which people were killed in the 30s. The big-time communists were killed in the 30s. I knew more about the big-time communist murders than American presidents. And I knew a lot about American presidents. And so why would I borrow that? And he goes, it's a much better book. It's a lot more than that. You should be ashamed of yourself for not reading that book. And that's the kind of thing that appeals to me, when someone shames me. And then he humiliated me in public, and I was not going to let that happen again. So I came home from that conference, and I read it in a month, about it. All 3 volumes in about a month. No one will ever humiliate me on this topic again. And the specific part of the Gulag that he called attention to was the Bluecaps. He says, I just want you to read this chapter. He gave it to me that night. I read it that night. I'm like, yeah, I should probably read that book. And so I want to start by looking at Bluecaps, right, which I think is the key to his political teaching. It asks at least 2 of the 3 big questions for Solzhenitsyn. So I don't know how many people have the Peterson version and how many have the other version, but I am prepared to do both, I believe. All right, so we're now going to turn to Bluecaps. So for those who have the book, turn to that. It's on page 144. For those who have the other book, it's 66. All right, so one thing that the other book doesn't have is the sections of it. So I think the people with the photocopy have the sections. There are 3 sections, okay? It goes from 66 to 73, that's part 1. So in your version, oh, I need to get that here. So on 73, in the Peterson version, as it says, as the folk saying goes, if you speak for the wolf, speak against him as well. That's the beginning of part 2. Okay? And then part 2 goes on until, in the Peterson thing, excuse me, I'm in the wrong chapter, 1 second. Begins on page 79 at the top. The first words are, from the most ancient times, justice has been a 2-part concept. You guys good? Mm-hmm. That's the beginning of the 3rd part. So the Peterson thing doesn't have a marking there, but the Solzhenitsyn's version does have markings there. So part 1, part 2, part 3 in this book. You guys good? So what is part 1 about? Okay. Part 1 is about the question of what motivates the Bluecap. Who is a Bluecap? A Bluecap is an interrogator. Their job is to be brought a candidate for the Gulag, to find that person guilty, and then to send them off. There needs to be a confession in this part that is a signature. And then later on you'll be sentenced, but this is to get you into the gate of the Gulag. So, now, that's the Bluecaps job. What motivates the Bluecap? On page 145, this must be on page 67 in the Peterson thing, on page 145 in the favored edition, and I think probably 67 in the Peterson one, Solzhenitsyn writes this in the paragraph that, I think it's right near the top. Did they know these were fabricated? Yes. They understood the cases were fabricated, yet they kept on working year after year. How could they? Now that is a very interesting question, right? It's how do you live a lie for your life? Right, so teachers do it all the time. Yes, this is an A paper. Right, it's the same concept. How do you but here you're damning people. Right, you are damning people to this. So the Bluecaps are, and they never find anyone innocent. They always know the evidence is fabricated. I think Solzhenitsyn gives a figure like 85% of the cases are totally fabricated. 10% are mostly fabricated. And then 5%, like, you were stealing state property. I understand why, but so they're almost all fabricated. So how could they do it? And he gives a series of answers in part 1 to that question. You guys catch all these answers? Here are the answers he gives. They've been taught not to think. Page 145 in the favorite numbering. Right? They're just obeying orders, like the camp guards at Auschwitz. Right? The work in the organs lead to honor and comfort, or as he says on page 146 and 147, awards and decorations. They have a greed for power, or a greed for gain. And then he goes on to analyze those two things as if they are the main thing. They're greedy for power, and they're greedy for gain. Now, when talking about, and these are all, I'm going to say, very human and even very pedestrian motivations. Right? Why am I doing this to you? Why am I finding you guilty? I enjoy exercising power over you. And any teacher who has seen students squirm in their seat and enjoyed it knows what he's talking about. Any bureaucrat or BLM member who's shaken someone down knows the love of power when you exercise it over another human being. And there's also gain. If I find this person guilty, I can have his wife. If I find this person guilty, I can have his apartment. If I find this person guilty, I can have their stuff. These motivations have been around, can we all agree? They've been around since the beginning of human beings. So the Bluecaps are just normal, corrupt people. You can't really even blame them for being this. They're trying to achieve honor, power, awards, gain in a system. And he goes through part 1 and really shows how pedestrian they are. Let's call them what they are. They're clerks. They're nothing but clerks. So who built the thing? It's kind of the question. Did the people who build the department store where the clerks work, are they motivated by the same thing? Or to put that now correctly, are the people who built the Gulag motivated in the same way as the people who work in the Gulag? Okay, well, we're going to get to that, but my daughter worked at Fred Meyer over the pandemic, and she would come home almost every day and say that people would come in and complain that she wasn't doing anything about this guy in the vegetable department who was picking out carrots without a mask on. And my daughter gets to say things like, well, that's really too bad. I don't make the rules, and I don't enforce the rules. I check you out. And And the people often would apologize to her. She's a clerk, right? And she's in a good situation. She's not killing anyone or sending them to their doom like the Bluecaps are. Okay, so we can see that analyzing why the Bluecaps do what they do is interesting, but it's a smaller question. These guys are you and me, the Bluecaps. They're you and me, normal motivations. Part 2, I would say, complexifies that picture. Okay, so part 2 for those with the Peterson starts on 73. And for those with the favored numbering, it starts on page 160. What kind of a man is Solzhenitsyn? Is he a man of normal motivation? I think the answer to that is yes. Does he really go after the Bluecaps in part 2? No, he's kind of a but for the grace of God go I kind of guy, right? Very famous line in this that we need to look at, and that's on page, I'm now finding it, I'm now losing it. Page 168 for those without the favorite numbering, and page 75, I think, in the Peterson. Okay. So this is the part which gets, if you think about it, Solzhenitsyn in trouble with the Western liberals, because he will not simply condemn the Bluecaps, right? After going through it, and when he talks about himself, was I motivated by a desire for power, he asks himself? Mm-hmm. Yes. And he gives example after example when he was an ossifer in the army, when he sent other people out, when he was captured, he had injured comrades carry his bags. I'm an officer. It's beneath my dignity to do that. He talks about that for page after page. And he says, well, when I was a student, they tried to recruit me. Why didn't I say yes? I mean, was I morally repulsed by these guys? Well, I mean, I had something else to do that day. He didn't have a principled account of why he shouldn't join them. He kind of drifted away from them. And then he showed some of their same characters. And then you get to the famous line. What page did I say it was?
75.
175, 68, 75 in Peterson. Very famous. So let the reader who expects this book to be a political expose slam its covers shut now. Like this is, and then he uses the famous and I think very important principle. If only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. Why can't we find anyone who'd want to be a Bluecap and just kill him? Why? Because that person is right now working at Fred Meyer, or running a bank, or running a school. I mean, these are very normal human desires. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own soul? All right, so that's the moral principle, kind of. The line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Later on he'll say it doesn't cut through class or race. I always add sex, just to connect it to other things that I do. Right, so you can't, we're all mixed. We're all fallen. We're all in the image of God. Right? So you cannot do the simple thing. Now, and any political movement that assumes that you can, or is inspired by the idea that you can separate human beings out and eliminate them, that's the beginning of the Gulag. right? That's the beginning of the Gulag. So he does not condemn the Bluecaps. He has sympathy for them. They are motivated by what everyone else is motivated by. Are we in good shape? Is it easy to sit there and say, under no circumstances would I be a Bluecap? It's the easiest moralizing in the world. But he's inviting you to say, look, let's say the Bluecap recruiter comes to your house and says, become a Bluecap. You say, I don't think so. Become a Bluecap or your daughter is out. Like, normal human motivations would lead you to become a Bluecap. Right? Become a Bluecap or you lose your apartment. In the Soviet Union where there's no private property and no alternative. These are all normal human motivations. He'll go through this in other parts of the book. Are we in good shape? All right. So the Bluecaps are the clerks. They're retail evil, but not really evil. They're good and evil. But how do we understand? So that's the first part that he handles in the second part. The first question he handles in the second part. Are the Bluecaps different than me? The answer is no. The second thing he does in the second part is concern himself with what I'm going to call a new kind of human being. He calls them, and I assume that the translations are all the same, the evildoers. And he does this for those with the favored numbering, that is mine, page 173 to 175. It is in a paragraph that begins with the words, and why is it that for nearly 200 years the security, you guys there?
76.
76, thank you, for those with the Peterson edition. Now, I want to tell you that I think what I'm about to say contradicts what I just said, right? On the one hand, when he talks about the Bluecaps, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human being. Then, there's this group of human beings that are pure evil, and he calls them the evildoers. The idea that the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every person means that every person is capable of redemption, can be redeemed, because there is something in them that can recognize their own evil. The idea that some people are pure evil means that some people are beyond redemption. Right, so for those of you who read Brothers K, this is Shmerdyakov, character without conscience. And sticks it to people his whole life until he dies, and even sticks it to people when he dies. Right? And is he a human being? It's controversial in Dostoevsky. Where does he come from? He grows from the mildew in the bathhouse. Or at least that's what his dad told me. So it's not a great thing to have your dad tell you. My dad never said anything like that. All right, so when we're talking about this in the second group, these evildoers, we're talking about something entirely different. What are we talking about? We're talking about the demons in Dostoevsky. We're talking about Nechayev, the Catechism of the Revolutionary. We're talking about Rakhmatov in Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done, the terrorists, right? That's who we're talking about. But they're motivated by something beautiful, they think, the building of a new society. It's just that all of these bad people must be eliminated in order for us to build that society. Okay. All right, so let's take a look kind of closely at this, if we can. So this is beginning with that paragraph that says, and why is it for nearly 200 years, and so on. Because the key to this new kind of human being, you guys catch it in one word, what is the key? Ideology. Mm-hmm. Ideology is the key. So let's start with that, okay? So for those with the favored numbering, this is right at the bottom. Object of policy, that we're going to liquidate the kulaks. The dreams that tyrants had was like to satisfy their sexual desires, or to have more gold, or to be able to rape little boys. Just going through Roman emperors for a second. Right, and their dreams were small. And even in literature, and this is where he kind of grounds his argument, the tyrants, the despicable tyrants of literature, they're nothing compared to Stalin. I mean, what did Macbeth do? He killed his friend, the king. What did Iago do? He betrayed Othello. And this is what Macbeth's self-justification were feeble, and his conscience devoured him. Remember that in Macbeth? I mean, he just can't bring himself to kill him. And once he does, blood's all over his hands. How can I do that? Iago from Othello. Yes, even Iago was a little lamb, too. I think he's the most despicable character in Shakespeare. He just kills a couple guys, betrays Othello, and his wife Desdemona. I'm doing this from memory. The imagination and spiritual strength of Shakespeare's evildoers stopped short at a dozen corpses. Pitiful! Why did it stop short? Because they had no italics ideology. Right, now what is an ideology? An ideology is a justification for the evil that I do. In other words, it baptizes the evil that I do and calls it good. Now he gives examples of it, all right? That's what the next paragraph is about. Ideology. That is what gives evildoing its long-sought justification, and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. Macbeth was motivated by, like, I want to be king. And this guy's king now. That's nothing. Stalin wants to build a perfect society. That's a big dream. That is the social history which helps to make his acts seem good instead of bad, in his own and in others' eyes, so that he won't hear reproaches and curses, but will receive praise and honors. Then he gives some examples. Now, I'm not a fan of all these examples, but let's just go through them. That is how the agents of the Inquisition fortified their wills, by invoking Christianity. So the name of the good thing is Christianity. The means is torture. That's one of the examples I'm not all that fond of. We can talk about that later if you want. The conquerors of foreign lands by extolling the grandeur of their motherland. Once again, I think that isn't exactly what civilizing under colonialism was. So I'm not totally in love with that idea, that example. But we're going to get better here, right? The Nazis by race. That's a good example. The Jacobins, early and late, by equality, brotherhood, and the happiness of future generations. That's good, as an example. Right? In the name of abstract ideas, where we're going to make the world conform to this idea of justice, we're going to mow everything in the way. Thus you get a justification, and you get a lot more than a dozen corpses. Right, unless you put like 6 zeros after it. And that's just 1934, right? So thanks to ideology, the 20th century was fated to experience evil-doing on a scale calculated in the millions. This cannot be denied, nor passed over, nor suppressed. How then do we dare insist the evildoers do not exist? And who was it that destroyed these millions? Here's the key. Without evildoers, there would have been no archipelago. They're the constructors, right? They make the framework for the clerk, for the blue cap. Now, the thing that you worry about here from Solzhenitsyn's perspective, it seems to me, is the claim that there is a group of people in whom there is no line between good and evil. That is, there are evildoers. The central thing is that the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, but in the case of the evildoers, they're all bad. Right? And I think Solzhenitsyn is totally aware of this problem. Right? So he concludes this section by telling you what he's up to. He begins, or it's the last two paragraphs, he talks about, what did he talk about? Oxygen. Peter, do you remember what it was? It was, come on, you're the engineer in the building.
Light.
It was light. At a different place he talks about
Oxygen.
Yeah, it's oxygen at the end of it. So, oxygen is fine, it's a gas at 100 degrees below zero, and then all of a sudden, you keep putting pressure on it and decreasing the temperature, and what is it, minus 183 degrees, it liquefies and begins to flow. Or it becomes liquid. Okay, so at what point does, there's pressure on a human being, and at what point does he not become a human being? Right? That's how he introduces the last paragraph let's look at. Evidently, even evil doing also has a threshold magnitude. There may come a point when you do so much in the name of an abstract idea. Yes, a good human being hesitates and bobs back and forth between good and evil all his life. That's the blue cap. He slips, falls back, clambers up, repents. Things begin to darken again. That's the blue caps. But just so long as the threshold of evil doing is not crossed, the possibility of returning remains, and he himself is still within reach of our hope. Right? So that's the normal moral universe. The next word, it's always good when they drop a but. Right? But when, through the density of evil actions, the result either of their own extreme degree or of the absoluteness of his power, he suddenly crosses the threshold and has left humanity behind, and without, perhaps, weasel word, the possibility of return. So yeah, there may be this other class of human beings that really, that make the Gulag. They're new. They're without conscience, or rather their conscience has been displaced by ideology. And I think that's the key takeaway from part 2. Is it possible for ideology to displace the normal drama of good and evil that informs the human conscience? Now you see it sometimes. The one recently that I saw, and I'm sure everyone has examples of this, was something that happened in Detroit. A man and his pregnant wife were going out to the car. They were accosted by 2 peaceful protesters, as we call them. And the peaceful protesters were not letting them get to the car. And the man was trying not to push them or do anything ungentlemanly, but trying to protect his pregnant wife. And they wouldn't stop with cameras in the face, yelling at the couple. And eventually, they kind of pushed him aside and got into the car. And then they started banging on the windows. And the woman, who, this is the kind of woman you want to marry, pulled out the gun and said, "Get away from me." And she was fired from her job at a university. He was fired from his job at a university for, assaulting these peaceful protesters. And the thing that I think about is the soul of those protesters. Is that what's being described here? If you cannot give quarter to a pregnant woman, can you give quarter to anyone? Anyways, it's just a question to show that an ideology has this effect on conscience. and it might be a zero-sum game. It seems to be the idea that Solzhenitsyn puts forward here in part 2. Okay, part 3,
Can
you
I
can
have
see.
a quick
Go ahead.
question? Does he ever come up with a category of just deception? Because I think those that are deceived will be committed to something. Think of it in a minor sense, a much more minor sense. I'm just wondering, in the future, does he bring up
Yes,
that?
well, he talks about that. He does talk about it in the readings for the 3rd week that we have, that there are people who know that the ideology is a lie, and they self-consciously live for that lie. Like, it is possible to do that. So yes, he thinks that is a terrific tension that exists in the best of souls. Go ahead, Peter.
So a quote, and I'm not sure it's from this book or some other one, that I thought he was describing here was, in order for men to do evil, they must believe they're doing good. I thought that's what the ideology thing was.
Yeah, I think that's very
in this
close.
chapter.
It is? Okay.
That's very close to what I read on 174 in the paragraph that begins with the word ideology. I think that is his idea.
It's the paragraph right before Macbeth. To do evil, a human being must first of all believe that what he's doing is good.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought he meant when he says those that use Christianity, right? They're justifying to themselves that it's good, and they're using a word that means good to justify doing things that are just completely evil, right? Just how
Yeah,
do
well,
that?
and so this is why I don't want to get into the Inquisition, because I'm like a qualified defender of the Inquisition, and I don't think it was a Christian action more as much as a political action to unite Spain. So I think he's Russian. The Russian Orthodox don't like the Catholics. They believe the worst, and in the case of the Inquisition, there weren't as many dead bodies as legends have it, and it was mostly, I would say, going after Jews and Moors to unite Spain as a nation that could resist the church, actually. So I'm not a fan of that example, and I think the English, as colonizers, had more complex motivations than he gives them credit for. But I'm going to say that for the most part, I think he's right about the Jacobins. Mm-hmm. Right? And the Nazis, the Nazis come up again in part 3, right? They're the last part of the Bluecaps is about punishment. And in it, all right, so what to say about this? Let me see what I want to say about this. Is there a path to forgiveness for the evildoers? And that's what part 3 is about, part 3 of this chapter. The one that begins with the word, the most ancient times justice as a two-part concept, virtue triumphs, vice is punished. It's about that.
What did you say that was, Scott?
Are the evildoers beyond redemption? Can they be forgiven? Now, he compares, this is very interesting to me, and maybe it's something that we don't think about enough, and that is, he compares the Nuremberg trials to what's going to be needed in Russia, right? To what's going to be needed in Russia. We call it in South Africa as a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but let's leave that aside. The Nuremberg trials, he said, sometimes it was amazing. You'd put you'd put the Bluecaps on trial, or you'd put higher level evildoers on trial, and what would they do? They'd repent. Mm-hmm. And they would cry out. What I have it, on the bottom of 176, in the German trials, an astonishing phenomenon took place from time to time. The defendant clasps his head in his hands, refuses to make any defense, and from then on asks no concessions from the court. He says that the presentations of his crimes revived and once again confronted him and filled him with such revulsion, and he no longer wants to live. And it happened. And those guys would off themselves in prison before the death sentence would come. Now that's a powerful thing. And he says, did that have an effect on the German nation after the war? And the answer is yes. It repented. Through the Bluecaps and the evildoers, I'm going to say like kind of high-level Bluecaps. You got my picture here, right? They had to have something in them that was still human in order for them to ask forgiveness. And the other ones, what do you have to do with them? You have to kill them. Right? And not all trials ended with such dramatic confessions. But, some did, and it's amazing. It has a great effect on people. And then he asks, well, why haven't we had these trials in Russia? Even, that's one of my favorite lines, my new favorite lines in the Gulag is, let's be generous, we will not shoot them. But what are we going to do about this? Right? Can we get someone to publicly confess, I was an executioner and a murderer? And if we don't, and we just worry about stirring up the bad things in the past, the last line of the chapter, it is going to be an uncomfortable, horrible to live in such a country. So the nation itself seems to need a purging of the Bluecaps and definitely a confrontation with its own ideological lies and sins in order to recover from the devastation that it will have wreaked on the people. Now, the devastation that it wreaks on the inhabitants of the Gulag is really the theme of part 1, 2, and 3, and maybe a little bit of part 4 as well. I mean, it comes up certainly in part 4. But Solzhenitsyn is just as concerned about the effects it has. In fact, I should say it more strongly, more concerned about the effects it has on a people that allows a gulag to exist within its midst. So next time we're going to look at his personal ascent within the camps, and I'm going to try to show why it's both really great and very problematic. And then the time after that, we're going to go through the political implications of what's wrong with his own personal conversion, I think. So that's the trajectory where we're going. Now I will take questions. Did we get all of that, Daniel?
We did. It turned off for about a minute, but we're good.
All right, thank you. Daryl?
I want to understand what you mean by gulag. The system, the whole system of the prisons, or the place up in the islands?
It's the whole system. He calls it the Gulag Archipelago. Do you guys have the map of it in the beginning of the now in Russian, it's like namby-pamby. It's like rhymes. Gulag Archipelago. It's like a very poetic name to give in Russian. It doesn't sound as good in English. It doesn't rhyme but yeah, he means the whole system. And that's why it begins from the arrest.
Right.
And goes to the exile. Anything else?
Definitely. I
Yes,
know
go.
nobody else has something else. So, I mean, you're talking about national repentance. It's just way too much right now. What about our southern situation if we had something similar?
Well, yeah, I would say that the United States did not have national repentance after the Civil War. And that is a reason for the difficulty in reconciling both races and sections. But, I mean, like, I don't blame them in some way, because in a way it was a different kind of thing. It was blue caps against blue caps. I mean, he really thinks that the birth of ideology, I mean, the French Revolution is a great example, but it doesn't account for every political conflict. Often people are just loving gain, not wanting to give up what they have, wanting to exercise power over people. And in those circumstances, it's a much, I want to say, lower level of conflict. The ideological conflict is existential for a political community, I think. And so the need for national reconciliation goes up as the ideological content of the war or conflict goes up. You follow me? I think that's the way that's the way. Otherwise, it's just Macbeth stuff. It's just like a normal election. You might hate the person a little bit next to you, but you're not going to kill them. Those are just normal democratic passions. But under conditions of ideological conflict, I'm going to break you. And that's when you have a greater need for it. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm not certain I'm understanding. So you're suggesting the Civil War conflict was lower level?
Mm-hmm.
Because
And yet-
slavery wasn't the only issue. It was the excuse.
There's lots.
It was what separated them. It was the only separation they had, right? Because
It was a big deal. It was
economic.
a big part of it. Big part of it.
It's what allowed them to create the distance.
Well, the way I would look at it is something like this. In the American Civil War, the ideological temptation was on the Union side. What I mean by that is they might have said that the South is a conquered people. We're going to now remake them in an image that is foreign to their previous life, and we're going to do it in 6 years. Right? And that's what it would require in order for I would say, an ideological transformation to be on the table there. And but look, I mean, it was a civil war. How many people did the North kill in the South after the war as punishment? 1. Like, is it all right to kill people after a civil war for punishment? The leaders? Yeah, I mean, like, they were traitors. And it was, I would say it was low-hanging fruit. So I would say that they didn't go very far at all in the direction of trying to reconstruct the South in the way that I mentioned. You really have to lob off the head in ways that they never really thought of doing. Yeah.
Scott, this was written or published in the 60s, and Solzhenitsyn lived till 2008, 2008,
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about the comparison or the analogy of the Nuremberg trials and Germany's national repentance, would Solzhenitsyn have said that 1991 for the Soviet Union was adequate?
No,
As a comparison?
he wrote and spoke on that topic at the last years of his life, and he thought that was the biggest mistake. That there was no decommunization at all in the Soviet Union, which really, it still lingers as a problem. It's probably not as big as many Americans think it is as a problem. The people aren't communists who were leading Russia, but they also weren't public spirited. And especially in the transition after Yeltsin. So yeah, he's a total believer in that there needed to be, that the files needed to be opened up, and they need to be integrated into what Russian kids know. And the people who were responsible, who were still alive, needed to be shunned from public life. And all of that didn't happen. Some of it happened. I mean, this is required reading in Russian schools. It's their Tom Sawyer, or whatever it is now. I'm sorry.
He said it ought to be, or it is?
It
right?
is.
Oh, it is.
Putin made this, the abridged copy that everyone has, required reading in Russian schools. So anyone who says that he's there to reestablish communism, you throw that back out, because this is not a pro-communist book. I mean, I know a lot of things. I know that one more than anything. So, any other questions?
Evildoers, or the builders of ideology, are they, like when they're the common man, like when they're the peaceful protesters, assaulting those people, what divides them from the clerks? Like, are they aware of the ideology that they're building? Like, what is their motivation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Let me rephrase that question, and this will be helpful in terms of all the Russian books too. So when you have an ideology, does it create true believers, right? And then how far down does that sink in the ethos of a country? And I mean, that's exactly the question that Dostoevsky was so interested in. What is there to resist the making of this new man by these ideologues? And he thought there were natural obstacles and cultural obstacles. The natural obstacle to the seeping down of ideology is the conscience, right? And the conscience works best when it has cultural support from national, like patriotic norms and religious faith. And that when those things are attacked and you're left with the bare conscience in the face of ideology, expect it to work a lot. Expect the ideology to work a lot. And you will get no resistance to those ideologies from what we today call liberals. People who don't believe in the country and don't believe in God, even though they may think this is going too far, the bare exercise of conscience is not enough to resist the idealization of people. So, I mean, in that way, maybe Stalin's right. We can make a new man as long as we destroy every vestige of a culture that supported the old man. That's the logic of ideology. And you have to give it to the ideologues. If they're right, then there's a lot of things that we think are wrong. Did that answer your question?
It did.
It wasn't the one you wanted there. There's no three-step plan.
So what's going on right now? What are the motivations, or what is the new idea of justice that we are seeing in America today? Like they're trying to burn it down, but what do they want to build?
Well, that's always the question. Always the question. And we're going to talk about that next time. That's the first topic for next time. Because the first step in the making of ideology applying ideology to politics is the destruction of what was there. And the thing that Solzhenitsyn notices is that job is never done because so many of the resources that it must be destroyed are natural. Right, so one aspect of his answer is that the destructive nihilism is never complete. So there's never an actual building except a building for the destruction of the old. And that was definitely Dostoevsky's point of view. The nihilists burn down the town and they leave. They don't, like the phoenix doesn't rise from the ashes and we have crystal palaces where everyone is happy. Which, yes, that's a reference to Notes from the Underground. So, which you guys had in class with me, right, years ago.
It did indeed.
So yeah, I mean, I think his bottom line view is that the destructive nihilism of revolutionary spirit is never complete. So you should be happy. They'll always be with us. Anything else?